And you built those trails with your,
Oh, that's cool.
really cool. That's not an easy trail to get to French. That's not easy. There's some up there.
Yeah, there's some pretty steep sections here. So we're gonna have most people via Zoom.
Okay.
COVID, right?
It's pretty bad. I guess I don't think we'll have any problems. It's taking my camera so long. So it's connected. Connected properly. I have to turn this back on. Are we back on? Yes, we are. It wasn't for just a little bit there. It wasn't working.
Hey, David.
Hi, Rob.
How goes the battle?
Yeah, hi, Brad. That was going okay. Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, I didn't print, do you guys need minutes and agendas?
I do not. I have everything.
Yeah, I have everything on.
Will be here.
I got minutes and agenda.
I think I have them.
Okay.
We'll see.
I won't waste the paper. You guys are all set. I apologize for the whistling heating system, but that's,
At least it's working.
it's keeping us warm.
That's right. It's gonna be cold this week.
Part of something downtown.
I did hear from Eric who said he's not coming because he's at that.
Yeah,
There's
I'm
a
going
simultaneous-
Thursday, so.
Okay. Not quite simultaneous because it's actually 7.
Yes, with this meeting tonight, I'll go on Thursday. That was nice.
And 95.
Yeah, we just got them at work.
Yeah.
So
I just bought 50 of them.
I think we're wrapping up. It's $8 a week or what they're.
Yeah.
what
Dude,
we're-
You're supposed to be able to wear them 5 times before you throw them away.
And right now, because of the ski program and my boss being super kind, I'm in the office 3 days a week.
Is there anything you don't do that you're not involved in? Could you name one thing that you're not
She
involved
wears a lot of hats.
I
in? Are you
want to
running for
not-
selectman?
No,
Eric is.
no, I know, he's awesome.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm doing that. I was on school board, that was enough of it.
You were selected for years and years, right?
Me, yeah, 20 years.
Yeah. Well, that's given back, huh?
First thing you learn, politics, everything was super slow.
I was a Boy Scout troop committee chairman for 20 years, and that nearly killed me.
I'm trying to go out with a bang at least for recreation. So. Online payments should be up this week. We got that working. Hopefully we get programs up.
Okay, why don't we get started? Because it's about 4 minutes after 6. This is the Enfield Master Plan Task Force. It is January 24. Calling the meeting to order at 6:04, 6:03, 1 o'clock. We'll do roll calls. Other side of the table.
Brad Rich.
And people on Zoom,
Phil Vermeer.
okay,
Lindsay
Phil?
Smith.
Hi, Lindsay.
Ashley Wood.
You're there, okay. I guess we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 people. That's close enough to a quorum that I think we can conduct our business legally. Does anyone have any objection to the agenda as it is written? And here's Sealy. Hi, Sealy.
Hi there.
Okay, first business item is review and approval of the January 10th minutes. Does anyone have any comments, corrections?
Quick question on line 180 and 181. Under future land use and public parks, Richard suggested asking the Shaker Ball Fields for what? I couldn't figure out what it was referring to. Something in the previous paragraph?
Should I have been adding, maybe? Might, we were talking about sections to add, it looks like.
Yeah, it might have been.
Ah, I think you're right.
Uncut typo on my end.
That's all I had on that.
Okay, are there any other comments, questions, or suggestions? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with one noted correction.
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded. Because we have a lot of people on Zoom, we'll do roll call. Ashley, how do you vote?
Yay.
Lindsay,
Yay.
Bill,
Aye.
I'll vote yay. Sealy, yay.
Yay.
Minutes are accepted unanimously. Somebody else coming in? Who we got? Okay, I don't know if Sarah has that. Hello, Sarah Ann. Could you identify yourself, please? Could you unmute yourself and identify yourself as a visitor? Okay, we'll just continue. Let's see. For co-chair report, Lindsay, you want to start off, and then I will say my piece.
Yeah, so last meeting I said there's a 99.9% chance that town meeting's going to be moved, or I said 98%. There's not 2% or greater chance that it won't be. The select board is weighing some multiple options, so we can't. I thought they were pretty much guaranteed. I have no idea where they're at with their communication, so we need to be prepared for something in March, and or as soon as I have information, I'll let y'all know. What they didn't understand is that they have the ability to schedule the business session any day that they want, because we're a bifurcated town meeting. And so I think that with that piece of knowledge, they thought they had to have a state of an emergency. They don't, as long as it's posted and warned. And so I'm not sure where they're at. I'm trying to stay on top of it, but so they've been looking at other options for continuing to have it in March. I think there's going to be some pushback, but I'm not sure what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
Okay. Now that we know how to do it.
It was funny, we saw the first one come in, Sarah with one initial. And then there was a one initial.
I think if people don't identify themselves right away, you should drop them.
Yeah.
You know, like instead of moving on and letting them come in, like if it's a community
Yeah.
member, they can come back.
That's a good idea. Thank you. Good
Just as
suggestion.
it might be unavoidable, but that might be one way. So anyways, we just need to be prepared because I have no idea what's going on. And so I've asked them to keep me in the loop, seeing as how I have to run the meetings. So we'll catch back up when, but that's all I got.
Okay. Planning board is going to be down 1 and possibly 2 members. I am extending an invitation to anyone on this task force who might be interested in taking on another 2 meetings a month, to consider joining.
I already got sucked into the budget committee.
You got something to
Yeah,
budget?
can you hear the sucking sound?
I can,
And
but
you're gonna be great.
isn't their job over like, a town meeting or
I don't know.
You get a break. You get a break.
Do
you
I?
get a
I
break?
think you
Yeah.
get a break.
Funny.
Can't sucker you into it, can
No, I'm not doing 2.
I? Okay,
They don't stir the cycle.
anyhow.
I heard Ashley wants to do it.
Yeah, just putting it on the table for people to consider. That's all. I guess that's all that I had to deal with. So for new business, we're gonna let Brandy talk about the land use chapter and then hopefully do a quick demo of the mapping tool that you showed to me and Rob and Cecilia the other day. So go ahead, Brandy.
Great. Rob, you may want to, as a to start up, and give me permission. Oh, I have it. Never mind. I didn't think I did. I promise not to start playing guitar. So you've got a draft on Friday of the land use chapter in progress. The major work was gotten done in the last 2 weeks is to make a linkage between your property assessment database and the GIS mapping. So we have a lot of data that we can crunch and use, but which will be helpful for housing as well as for this chapter. And you can see some of that information already added in here into this chapter. And I'm going to show you that map. You got the current land use map as a PDF. So a smaller version of that map. And that's one of the things that we've been able to do with the map data, which is show what all of the parcels of land are currently used for. And that also made it possible to make the lands that are public open space or other types of conserved land that are not available for development. I was able to distinguish those out and show those. And then did some updates of the building footprints and other things as I went along as well. So that's coming along well. And I've started with that base, have also been doing some natural resource map crunching. You have some natural resource inventory information from your natural resource inventory that was done, I think, in the mid-2000s. And some of that we can update a little bit with more recent data layers and reference that back. So there'll be some additional natural resource mapping for this first section of the chapter here, the land use chapter, the natural constraints and hazards chapter. So one of those will be a, you got, actually I don't think I sent over I think I'll pop this one up. I didn't email this map because it was being grumpy with me on Friday, and it's decided it didn't want to get smaller than 40 megabytes no matter what I did. I will eventually make it smaller than 40 megabytes, but it just didn't happen on Friday. I know why it's 40 megabytes. I just didn't have time to deal with it. Let me get back here and share my screen. So this is the water resources map. So this is one of the natural resources map I would envision that will include in the plan. And I'm thinking there'll probably be maybe 3 maps or altogether. So this will be one of them. So this shows wetlands, floodplains, and hydric soils. And the hydric soils, I like to include that because if one was to go out and do a field delineation for wetlands, the hydric soils are a pretty good indicator that some wetland will be found. So they're sort of a good stand-in for unmapped wetlands. So what you're seeing here on the screen, the striped purple areas, that's your flood zone, the special flood hazard area. And then there's a dark green. In many cases, the flood is going over the top of the wetlands. So they're sort of layered on top of each other. So underneath, like in this area where my mouse is moving, there's a dark green. And those are wetlands that show up on the wetland inventory maps that the state maintains. And then along the edges, you'll see some lighter green. There's like some lighter green down here, and those are the hydric soils.
Brandy,
You can see coming in there too. Yes?
I just want to clarify, the wetlands you have are the ones that Enfield designated prime wetlands.
No, they are all of the state mapped wetlands. You have in your natural resource inventory prime wetlands as well. And let me see, I can pull that map up.
We have more, but we did not put them on the warrant article that designate those. There's more that were done. And you're right, having the hydric soils, because that really determines what's wet.
Yeah, so this is the map from 2005 that you have in your natural resources inventory. And as you can see, there's a lot of similarities here. I haven't done a double check to see when the last time was that the state's wetland inventory map was updated, if it's been updated since 2005. If it hasn't, then these may be actually quite similar in their extents, but I don't have that that's available to do a comparison right now live, but we can look at that, but it's not actually that dissimilar in terms of these mapped areas as I'm sort of bouncing my eye back and forth. The soil maps have been updated since 2005. If I'm trying to remember, I think the date I saw on them was maybe 2013 or 2012. It looks like, and those are done by USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service. So the hydric soil maps, I'm seeing a couple of differences there. That's, I'm sure, based on the maps having been, the soil unit maps having been updated. So, you know, we can go, I'll go back and forth on that. These maps are not labeled up yet. I don't have the road names on them, and I don't have all of the source information on them yet, but we'll get there. And get the north arrow and the scale and all that on them. But so that'll be one of the natural resources maps, and I'm going to pop back to stop sharing that. Back to showing this. So they'll go in conjunction with this section here on natural constraints and hazards. So your 1995 plan said that 62% of the land area was either steep slopes or wetlands. So I'm moving towards recalculating that percentage and seeing with updated mapping where that lies. I think your prior estimate of steep slopes actually came off the soil maps, and it's now possible to generate a steep slope map from the LiDAR data, which gives you the terrain, and you can get the mapping software to tell you how much of that terrain is steep. So that'll give us a much more accurate estimate in terms of how much steep soil you've got. The LiDAR information is, if you think, for any of you who have never heard of it or seen maps that are made from it, it basically takes the whole town and breaks it into about a 2.5 by 2.5 foot grid. And each little square in that grid has an elevation point data that goes with it. So you can generate pretty accurate contours and slopes and things like that, elevation maps from this information at pretty high resolution. So there's a little more processing to do, but then I'll be able to fill in this information and sort of see whether that estimate that you had in the 1995 plan continues to hold through. And then, so we'll have a map with the slopes on it. Actually, I can show you that in progress. I need to do some more processing of the map. Because it's so detailed, you actually have to dumb it down to make it viable. It generates a little bit too much noise. So this is actually, what you're seeing here is actually the steep slopes at full detail. So the areas that are red are the really steep slopes that are 25% or more, and the oranges are in that 15 to 25% range. But where it's all sort of just speckled like that, that has to be eliminated from this map. And there's ways to make the computer do that. So, but the areas that you see are pretty solidly red in color on this map are going to end up coming out as your steep slopes, essentially. And we'll get the background noise taken out, and you can see that. The accuracy of this stuff is really quite interesting. I mean, if you come in here, just because you'll be able to get the sense of this little line of red that you're seeing come through here, which you can actually see coming all the way across here, that's the edges of the cut for the railroad. So that's the level of detail that you're getting. So that's the rail trail, and that's the cut when they put in the rail line. So you can get pretty detailed data on elevation that way. So we'll have the map, so the slope map, and then the other map that I think we will want to get in here is something that deals with forest block and wildlife habitat. So there's a couple of data sources for that to be put together and get that in here. And then potentially also a soil map that would look at septic suitability, because that outside your sewer service area, that becomes a really big determinant for development potential, is the suitability of the soils for septic systems. So did anyone have any questions or comments on the natural resource portion of the text that I sent around?
No.
Okay. So as I said, we can map out the public and conserved lands, and we'll look at those on the current land use map in just a couple of minutes. But that comes to about 6,500 acres of public open space land, and that's about a quarter of your land area. And then there's the private parcels that are conserved on top of that. So I think we're running the rough estimate. I haven't finished doing all those calculations, but I think it's somewhere right around a third of the land area has some sort of legal protection that will mean it's not going to be developed as far as we can see into the future.
Brandy, how does that correlate with other towns in your experience? Is that high, about the same, or lower?
You have a pretty high amount. It's not, wildly high, but you definitely have a significant amount. And one of the things that you see happen is that because you had that base of state land, which I assume has probably been in place for a more of a period of time, a longer period of time, private land trust type organizations really like to cluster conserved lands because of the habitat benefits and such that come from having larger tracts. And so there is this tendency towards concentrating conservation in particular communities or in particular parts of a community, because the idea of clustering it and getting those blocks and tracts to be larger and contiguous has a lot of ecological benefits. So I think you see some of that as well. I'm sure that when the Upper Valley Land Trusts and other conservation organizations sort of rank projects, they get inquiries from property owners who are interested in essentially dispensing with their development rights, either for tax benefits or for to sell them separate from the land. I'm sure that land in Enfield actually scores pretty highly in the rankings of property because of the amount of conserved land you already have.
Thank you.
There's actually been, some interesting study of what the impacts are. I know that I did work now almost 15 years ago with a town over on Lake Champlain on the Vermont side, Shoreham, and they had been a community where the Vermont Land Trust had focused on some of its farmland conservation efforts, and they were, like I said, 15 years ago, running like 35 to 40% of their land had been conserved, and they were beginning to have rumblings of being concerned about it for tax purpose, reasons, that their land base was the base they could tax was being significantly reduced. Although in Vermont, the current use program kind of makes that a little weird. But anyway, there was starting to be some concern about that, and they had done a study, and this has actually been done in other places as well, that show that the land conservation actually raises the value of the surrounding land, which has another sort of set of interesting dynamics that go along with that from the point of view of the municipality as a taxing entity, and also from the questions of affordability of the community. So it does, high rates of conservation do tend to drive up land values surrounding it. So we'll make sure that the information about the public and conserved lands is also visible on the maps and tied back in. And then we talked a little bit, I think at the last meeting when David was going over the outline that they had come up with about the settlement patterns. So we filled that in a little bit more, that outline that you saw. And then we are actually going to be able to do a map that goes along with this. If we have to see if it, I haven't quite made it yet. I have a rough start of it. So I don't know if it's going to be as interesting as we think it might be, but if it's interesting, we'll include it. Showing the era of development. I'm going to switch back over to the mapping computer and show you that in progress. Let's get back to this. So we got to get rid of the slopes. I'm going to turn on this date built. So this is just off the individual parcels. And what you're seeing are the parcels of land that have information about the date the building that's on that land was built in the assessment database. Not all of the parcels obviously have that because some of them are undeveloped, and then some of them that are developed still don't have a date field. But the ones that we do have, so what you're seeing in the color range is that the green parcels, the gray, well, let's start with the gray parcels. The gray parcels are pre-1960 dates. And then the greens are the 1960s and 70s. The blues are the 80s and 90s. And the red is the 2000s. You know, in some instances, there's big swaths of land that have a 2000s date, like this one here that I've my hand is on. But that's just one. That's just one parcel of land, so it's not a major development. There, it's just a very large piece of land. So that will take some fine tuning, but you can see, like here we are coming in, you can start to see an era of, you know, of subdivision here, right? This whole subdivision has dates from the 60s and 70s, whereas move around a little more, here we've got an 80s and 90s one. So we may be able to go through, the goal is to sort of go through and kind of date out these subdivisions so they won't be done sort of parcel by parcel like this, but a little more generalized to give you a sense of when those places got built. Wow. One of the other interesting things you can see from this is the, to some extent, is new construction along the lakeshore. So I would assume that most of these have a new date built because they're either a replacement or major reno of an existing building that was on these lakeshore lots. And there's actually a fair number of these that are red, indicating that a lot of the activity, some activity along the shorelines in the last 20 years. Same over here on Crystal Lake, there's some as well. So this is the type of thing that we can see from this linkage and this connection between the assessment information and, you know, the detailed property information and the making it visual on the map. And I don't know, Rob, if you have anything to add. I know you've been looking at gathering up information on permitting, more recent permitting trends as well, and we'll use that to fill in here as well as we go forward. I don't know if you've gotten any data or sense of the data yet, or still digging.
Yeah, the building inspector and our executive assistant has been gathering, so they're still gathering for the last 10 years.
Yes. So that I think we'll be able to come in here to this recent development trends once we've got that review of what the permits have been, what's been happening with permitting over the last 10 years, and fill in more of this picture here under recent development trends. And then this perspectives and priorities section, I have to turn around more of the survey data to stick in here. There is actually not quite as much depth of information in the survey for the land use chapter. To be honest, the zoning questions that we asked, I think most people didn't have a lot of good information about what their zoning was, and so we actually didn't get a lot of sort of direction about things that people might want to see going forward, because most people were like, whoa, what we've got's fine. Which is, of course, one response, but it's kind of tied to not really knowing what the current, what the status quo is that people were saying they wanted to maintain. So I think you may have some better information in some of the other outreach platforms that you've got, that we can fill in some of that here. So I'm going to go back to the map and give one more walkthrough. So this is the basis on the map for the current land use map you got, and I do apologize because I decided at the last minute to tweak a couple of the colors, because they didn't show up very well once they left my screen here and I put them on the other map. And so this is slightly, there's some slight variation in color here between the two maps, but same basic principles going forward. It's a couple of shifts. So this is that assessment of sort of what you've got on the ground right now for land use. So the dark green areas, those are all of the public open space land, state land, some town land, and some sort of major nonprofit land conservation type properties. So the Upper Valley Land Trust, the protection, the Society for the Protection of Forests, Grafton Pond Land Trust owns some land over here. These are properties that they're basically open for some level of public use and recreation. So that's all of the dark green, and that's that 6,500 acres that we talked about back at the beginning of the chapter. And then the lighter green, so like where I'm putting my hand here now, and I think what I'll do is I'll pop the map, the photo behind this, so you can. We'll see how this goes. If it stalls out, gets slow to draw, then we'll turn the photo back off. But you have pieces of land like this piece here that I'm looking at up off of Eastman Hill Road, I believe that is. That's been conserved. It's still privately owned. It's not open for public access, but the land has been conserved. And so there are lands like that in various locations around town as well. And this is not going to redraw very nicely, so we're going to turn the photo back off. So you see some of those in the light greens. There's also common lands that are not available. So this is one, for example, here. When you've had a approved subdivision where land has been left as part of the, it's held usually by a homeowners association, and the terms are that it's not going to be built on. So you have land like that that's also development restricted functionally. So those are showing up in a really pale green on this map. And then the recreation, sort of like the major recreation areas, so the ski area, the golf course, they're showing up brown here. I think they're purplish on the PDF of the map that you got. I shifted those, the color of those a little bit. So we're indicating that use as well. So those are some of the big pieces of property. And then much, obviously, of the remainder of the land is either residential or undeveloped. And that's what we're seeing here in the pale beigey yellow and the grayish tone. So lands that are some combination of residential a single, for the most part, a single home on them, and undeveloped land. Now, farmland, for instance, tends to fall into this residential category. So you can look at some of this and you can see that there's definitely farmland in there, but it doesn't get separated out to that extent. So, and some of the undeveloped land may be timberland as well, so maybe being used for forestry purposes. So that's the residential uses. There's obviously more intensive residential uses as well, we show coming in. So if we're looking up here off of Anderson Hill Road, where you've got the quadplexes, those are coming in at that brighter yellow, so they're multi-units. We suspect there's actually more multi-unit housing than this in the village area. One of the things that we're hoping the permit data uncovers is some more of the apartments that may have been created, particularly in the village area in more recent years. That information, interestingly enough, does not easily pulled out of the assessment information. You would think it would be kind of a critical point, but it is actually, it doesn't easily pop out anyway in this way. You'd have to actually look at each and read the description of each individual property one by one, and can't just be grabbing it. So there's also public lands in here. So we looked at obviously open space land, but the town has various facilities. So town buildings, state has facilities, highway garages, things like that. So they show up in the blue colors, and the lighter blue is a use classified sort of as civic uses. So for instance, cemeteries are in that, museums, churches, other religious facilities, things of that nature show up in that lighter blue color. So you can get a sense of their distribution. And then the red is the commercial and industrial properties. There's a few bits of mixed use, which are orange, which is, if you think about it, it's your red and your yellow, your commercial and your residential combined together. Once again, this is something that there's probably more of than we can easily pull out of the assessment data. So that's something that looking at the permitting might actually bring us to color some more of these little squares in around the village, for instance, to be mixed use. So that is sort of the current pattern of what current land use looks like in Enfield. I don't know what I'm curious what your reactions are to seeing that, if it sort of lines up with what you thought was going on out there, or if it was somewhat surprising to see that landscape divided up and broken down this way. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Do you have any overlays of where the sewer lines go and the water water goes and where there's three-phase power, those things
So-
all come into consideration when you use the land for, like solar arrays and things like that, or the smaller lots.
Right. I don't have that on here yet, but you do have that information mapped in terms of where the water and sewer is. I'm not sure, I have to do a little more digging on the power question. So I will be getting those files or transferring them over. So actually, Rob, you can write down one of those things that didn't come in the data set that I did get, is that I didn't get the water and sewer lines. I can obviously see them on the other map, but I don't have the files for them. But in any, yeah, so that will be something that we definitely do want to show on here. And when we talk about the future land use map here in a few minutes, I actually used that reference point of where there is water and sewer for putting that map together.
And if you're looking at putting in solar arrays, you need to have three-phase power available close by, and
Yep.
you need to have a clear south-facing slope.
Yep.
And it can be a very steep slope that you can't build on, so it would be good utilization of that kind of property.
Yeah, the distance to three-phase power and also to the transmission grid is pretty, it's critical certainly for larger solar projects. So the closer they can get, the less cost to them and the more efficient the whole operation. And so you really do see those projects following the transmission corridors and the three-phase lines out pretty closely. So we could definitely take a look at where you've got some potential sites that could work. That slope and elevation map data also produces something called an aspect map, which does the thing where it would identify the south-facing slopes. You can do that as well. Okay, so I'm going to return back, before we go back to the map, to text. So the major portion, obviously, function of this chapter is the future land use plan. And in fact, that's sort of the core of the master plan itself. So typically the approach is to divide up your municipality into areas and to talk through those areas and sort of create this framework of what you envision as future use and development and conservation as well in these areas. And so I'm hoping to get some feedback from you guys tonight as to where this is going, whether it's headed in the direction you want it headed in, and some help on refining it and getting it to more specifically reflect what you've been hearing over the past year as you've been talking to people and hearing what the community wants for the future. So you can see that there's sort of there's a series of planning areas: village, lakeshore, residential, rural, business, and resource and recreation. And then within those, some of these I've broken them down further, so you can sort of talk about each area more specifically in terms of what you are envisioning. And those are keyed back to that land use map, that future land use map, which, if you're looking at the PDFs, is the one that's called Fulu.
So one of the things that is striking me as I look at all this information, as I follow like what's happening in Lebanon as I think about the municipalities building meeting tonight is less is more. We have people who really like maps and can dig into stuff and see, and I think it's we need to have that information. I like this future land use map in a way that it breaks down these areas. And I think in the text, we need to have really clear statements like development not recommended here, or there's room for this. It just is, I still think we also need to really be clear that we haven't had a lot of development. There is an overall perception that building has been happening everywhere at all points in time, that we're putting up high rises. Like people just have these misconceptions and this freak out. And like, no, we haven't really had a lot since, you know, and I think that map is really helpful of like, when was Anderson Hill built? When was the Shaker, you know, like these sort of housing developments, and showing that like, we're not like just building on every possible corner. And also we've identified places that are appropriate to build, but not, you know, and a lot of places, and as well as highlight, there's a lot of places that are not. But keeping it really simple. I'm looking at like what's happening in Lebanon right now. Like, you know, they've got like 17 zoning ordinances and people are freaking out because they don't pay attention until the very last minute. And then they all complain that like they didn't have any information. Or the municipal building meeting that's happening tonight, people are like, how can you do this so close to town meeting? Because this is the time you do it, you know, like this is something that's being talked about for years. Just because you're paying attention now doesn't mean that it hasn't been going on. And so the more simple we can keep it and straightforward, and like, to me is better. I think there's a lot of ways to do lots of inlays and overlays and this kind of stuff. But I just, the general public's capacity for a real understanding is because they're busy with other things. This is not their place of expertise. Take it or leave it.
Okay. So I think in terms of the number of categories, this is pretty simplified. I think it's a good question of sort of how detailed you want to go with the text that goes along with this. We can do some stuff with some pictures perhaps to help illustrate what you're envisioning for some of these areas. That might be good way to go. In talking with David and Celia, we talked about whether there should be more room for some growth around the village. Are there places where you could see the village expanding out from here? And I'm gonna see if I can make this zoom in. No, that's going the wrong way. Okay. You know, and that's a good question, and you know, this ties back into the where is there water and sewer. You know, I assume, and Rob, this is something we might want to talk to Jim and get some feedback on. But I'm assuming there's an elevation up the hill that's your upper limit, based on where the water tank is, to where you can service. So it pushing upwards in elevation may not be viable, but looking at some other areas that, you know, whether it's down in this area or extending out more in another way could be viable. Most of what's here in orange at this point has water and or sewer. There's some differences in terms of where one or the other is, but most of it is got some level of infrastructure provided at this point.
Right. I like this map a lot because it's simplified. And then I think like as the text is going, you know, and we say in the village, like, and then the recommendations and why, you know, we can give that detail, but I just, this is less overwhelming to me than the other one where I'm like, wait, what's that color and what's that one and that kind of stuff. And so this is a great breakdown, I think. And then backing it up with the text and like what's the recommendations, and this is all started in here, I think, really well. You know, so Crystal Lake has mostly developed shoreline, like there's not a lot of room to do more. So, you know, maybe like folks that are on Crystal Lake, like we're not recommending that it get further developed, and we could say, you know, or I just again, there's a lot of fear of development, and there's a lot of fear of what that means, and so I'm not this. We seem to be a culture of reactionary versus proactionary. So this is not specific to Enfield, but like, how can we just say we've identified the places, these are the plans, like, and other places aren't conducive for a whole multitude of reasons, you know, and also part of it's keeping our character. If we want to have that character of a New England town, you know, we recommend building out in the village area where there's supported utilities, but maintaining this traditional New England format where we're surrounded by single family homes and out into farmland kind of thing. And not that we're trying to build, because I know somebody who thinks that we're building high rises over on George Hill Road, you know, like, and have been asked about that a couple of times. Like, I'm like, what? There's a swatch of land out there. So I think,
So I do think that one of the, and let's get this back here, good things about a map like this, you know, is that it does break out both the areas where you want development to occur and the areas where you don't. So I think the more you can talk up the amount of land that is protected, that's beneficial to allaying some of those fears. Some of those natural resource maps really get at the constraints that exist on this land. So a lot, even in this yellow area here, it's not like all of this land is extremely well suited for housing. There are areas within there that are well suited, reasonably suited for housing, and areas that have, you know, constraints. They're wet or they're steep, or you know, things like that. So there are those issues, but this map, you know, doesn't really get to that level of detail. That's not the idea. The idea is to generalize it down to give sort of a sense of what that overall direction is.
right. And I think the description that we have, like, so it's that central area, which is where I live, and, you know, we're looking at our 20 acres of land and what it's capable of and not capable of. And, you know, currently we're doing that, but it's like, we're right past water ends at the house right before us. But I like this, how, you know, we're starting here, like some of this is undeveloped, but it has natural resource constraints. We can recognize that, but, you know, unless someone's a soil specialist, and we have the maps available, but the general public isn't going to, you know, I like where we're headed here, but I'm always, my encouragement is giving people enough information that they are educated, but not too much, or overwhelmed, and they can't then process anything. And I think we're getting a good balance here. And we continue on that. We have other maps available for people who really want to dig in and they understand what soils mean, or when they are looking at their particular parcel, and or for zoning and planning boards to be able to like utilize that stuff. But as the master plan, or like the first level, the general public level, we say like this central area right here, it has some undeveloped land, but it has natural resource constraints. Like, it's not, we don't recommend like overdevelopment here because of things, and like, and that might That's what I'm getting at. I'd love to hear from anybody else in the room.
I guess I would say that I agree with you in the sense that we have a couple of different layers of detail. And there's the simplified map, which just grabs basic concepts. And then from that, if people want to dig deeper, then they could go to a more complex map and more detail. And that would apply to the text also, I think.
So one of the other areas I wanted to bring to the committee and have you think about a little bit is these business areas off the interstate, so at the exits. And you'll see, David, that I made some changes to this map since we met. I had initially thought about including more of the business area coming on this side of the interstate, so where the old is that, I can't remember what that is over there. Is it still called Route 10 over there? I don't think it is. Off that southwestern side of the interstate over there. But this land is really hilly and rugged. So while there are places where you could build and put in some sort of a business use, and in fact there are one or two over there, on the map it looked pretty deceptive, as if there was this huge area suitable for business, which really is not a true case. And in fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll stop this one and I'll go to the actual live map. So let me get these back here. Turn this one off. Turn this one on. So let me put on the road labels too. So this is the area, this is Rice Road, Smith Pond Road in here. Let me turn it there further in. That's awesome. Where is it still? Okay, there we go. Now we can see a little bit of the earth back there. So you've got the golf course, you've got the ski center, then you have this land in between in here. It's fairly rugged. There's, as you can see if we zoom in here, there is a few businesses along here now. So my sense is that these might even be home type businesses operating up in here. But if we looked back at that things that are steep map, turn this off for a minute, you get the sense that you come in here, the terrain is pretty rough. There's land that's usable and land that's not. So I guess that's kind of a question as to whether you want to see any or how much of this business area come across the way. You see, I did do it here like that. And down here, it's only on this side because this other land is not really suitable or readily accessible either. Any thoughts on that in the group? maybe that's something that the economic development subcommittee also sort of wants to mark down on their list, because I know that thinking about these exits areas and what land is suitable, maybe that's something for you guys to consider more. It could be something to get some more public input on going forward as well. What sort of people envision as being
Is there
feasible and
water
desirable.
out there on those exits?
No,
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Already answered. I asked if there was water and sewer on those exits off of 89, and Rob and David said no.
No. I mean, the one thing to be said is the sort of businesses that would probably be most suitable for those locations are not going to need significant amounts of water and sewer. So you're looking at, you know, contractor yards, you know, people who are going to have trucking depot type of uses where being right on the interstate has benefits because they're servicing a larger territory. You know, you've already got some storage type uses, fuel distribution type uses. I would envision that would be the kind of thing that you'd be more likely to see, and their water and sewer needs are minuscule, essentially. Yeah, wholesale, wholesaler type uses, that type of thing. Yeah, the things that really demand water and sewer service are lodging, restaurants, food processing types, you know, food and beverage processors and workers, those types of businesses. Even simple office space doesn't generate really a lot of demand, and so on-site septic, and you know, assuming you can get potable water from a well reasonably, that all works. So I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to flag in particular on the future land use map. I think maybe let me hop back over the other. I think to stop sharing. Probably the other area to look at and to sort of think through is the boundary between the village and the Route 4 area. So let me go back here to. That's something that there isn't necessarily a definite right answer as to where that line should be drawn. In my mind, anyway, there's sort of room to shift it one way or the other, and arguments could be made in either direction. Let's see, go back to sharing this. So we're now up on Route 4. We're at the intersection of McConnell Road and Lovejoy Brook Road, which is where that line is drawn between the village and this Route 4 area, the business area in purple. So the orange and the purple meet here. You could shift that. And in some ways, this being sort of this business area, I know that your Route 4 study suggests it being much more mixed use than just straight business, that you do envision residential in there as well. So it's sort of deciding how to best classify this. Maybe it becomes another thing, a different thing than the other business areas. I'm
Randy,
open to ideas there. Yeah.
this is Rob. I would just like to also point out, you probably have heard this. One of the things that's becoming very clear to us is particularly in that Route 4 area where you're talking about, with that seam between the purple and the brown there, or the orange, whatever color that is colorblind. We have an issue there, particularly along Lovejoy Brook, where FEMA flood maps indicate flood zones and floodways that are acting as significant limitations on potential development. Because of that, and it may be something to at least discuss, and we can go over it in more detail if you'd like some other time, but are you showing, is that the flood map right there?
That's the special flood hazard area. I could color it to show you the floodway too, but that's both the flood fringe and the floodway colored bright purple or hot pink.
I had somebody in my office today whose land on Route 4 would be, you know, in most instances, highly developable because of its access to Route 4, the sewer and water. But his land is actually defined as floodway. And he's sort of looking at it as basically the land has been taken from him. That's what he said to me today. And he may have a point there because the floodway, you can't really do much with, right? I mean, there's significant limits.
Yeah, generally you can develop in the flood fringe, but not in the floodway. So the difference is that the terminology is that the floodway is where you can expect there to be actual flowing water during a flood. So this is the river comes over its banks and it's got a wider flow. And so it's the much more dangerous portion from a point of view of having a building be swept away, whereas the flood fringe, you know, water will rise, but it's not going to have that same force of action necessarily coming with it. I'm trying to switch up this symbology here to see if I can throw the floodway on top of that.
The town actually looked at some land as a possible location for our new public safety complex, which is discussion they're having tonight at the community building about the needs and the assessments and plans for that. And a couple of those spots on Route 4 would be a great spot for a firehouse or a police station, but turned out to not really be acceptable because of those limitations.
Yeah, a critical facility, which is what a firehouse would be, is a particular no-no in the floodway. Because, you know, exactly the equipment and people you need to go out and respond in a flood shouldn't be in the middle of the actual flood themselves. Sort of the basic principle going there. So this, I'm throwing over the top here. I'll make it darker so you can see the difference. So that dark purple area, that is how much of it's classified as floodway. And I mean, I don't know, Rob, to what extent, when did FEMA last do a flood study here? Did they change it radically the last time they did it? Have people gotten MOMAs in here to say that they are or are not, that they are above flood? So you can, a LOMA is a letter of map amendment.
Yes, we've been talking about that. So that's, I mean, basically, there's a high degree of suspicion that there is some inaccuracies in these maps, because these maps are not drawn by people on the ground in our town. They're drawn by people in an office somewhere else, and so
In Boston, they're just in Boston.
I mean, I've seen that in my own personal experience, but I actually have done a LOMA in my own personal experience because of inaccuracy. You know, where they just said, "Oh, you're close to a brook, you're going to flood," but the actuality is that, and the reality is that the elevations are dramatic, and we think that's the case in some of this area here, because I mean, we have had some very significant flood events in the last 20 years around here. Hurricane Irene and Sandy coming to mind. And while some areas in these mapped areas have gotten wet, some of them haven't. And I know the guy that was in to see me today, he was complaining where, he said portions of his property never got wet in the most recent floods. Portions of a neighbor's property did get wet, and his is in the floodway, and other people's aren't in the floodway. So again, I think there might be some inaccuracy there, which may warrant some further consideration.
So the issue with the mapping and the accuracy is a good one, and it's not one that municipalities have really any ability to affect, sadly. So the maps get updated, they're federally done. So they come out of FEMA. USDA is actually somewhat involved in the mapping as well. They have a published schedule of doing map updates. They do them watershed by watershed, and they tend to do them based on risk level in the watersheds. So oftentimes after there's a large storm, they will come in and they will remap the areas that were hardest hit by the last storm. So they're very reactive in that way instead of proactive. But so I have no idea. It would take some looking to see when your maps were last updated, whether they have been, now that when they do them, so the LiDAR data that I showed you, they're now using that information, and the maps are actually changing substantially when they do a new map update because the elevation data is much more accurate, and they are based on an elevation information. So what happens now is that individual property owners get an engineer, a surveyor, they go out, they take elevation readings, they prove that their piece of land is above the base flood elevation. They get a letter of map amendment that says you're not in the floodplain. But that doesn't change this map more holistically. And it doesn't change it up until the point that they come around to your community and do a map amendment process.
A particular interest, though, in this section, all that water that you see there is behind a dam at the Baltic Mill.
Yep.
And the Baltic Mill Dam at this point is no longer being utilized for anything. There was a guy that had hydropower there at the old Baltic Mill, but he is no longer generating power. The hydro plant at that facility is now defunct, and I don't think he has any plans to get it going.
When did he shut that down, Rob?
There was a very key piece of equipment that broke there, and it has not been generating power for a couple of years now.
I still see water flowing through that turbine house.
Oh, there's still water going over that dam too, absolutely,
Yeah.
but no, it's not generating any power.
Oh,
Sadly, the thing that it's turning isn't generating any power anymore. Right? Something on the inside of the system's been disconnected.
And then another interesting thing, just for your information, you can kind of see it in that map you were just showing. The reason why we have significant flooding threat on the north side of Route 4 there is due to the presence of the rail bed. As you pointed out earlier, the rail bed is a significant, geologic structure now, man-made, that actually serves as a dam.
Yep.
And a lot of the drainage that was installed underneath the rail bed is now non-functioning, meaning the culverts are plugged. And so a lot of the problems are caused by the presence of the rail bed. Same thing is happening in Canaan, next town over. They've actually had significant flooding events, and it can be largely pointed at the rail bed as a reason for their problem, that it's holding the water back. Because I've had engineers tell me that, the river and the lake can take the water, just can't get there fast enough because of the rail bed.
Yep, they have, what we would now call, they would never let you build something new, like the rail bed, in terms of it cutting off land from its natural drainage. But I think in particular that, there were pretty serious storms and flooding events sort of in the first part of the 1900s. So maybe from the 20s through the 30s. And in many cases, these rail beds got further reinforced at that point, bermed or other things, so that they would not be susceptible to flooding. But in doing that, they did create these down slope, or I guess upslope in this instance, issues that cut off these drainage ways and leave it behind. And once again, that's, you know, it's something that's very difficult to sort of go back against and address at this point. So yeah. And the other interesting thing is that FEMA doesn't take the the controlling of water levels by dams into account the way you might think they would when they do the flood mapping. So, for instance, that's one of the things that you see all along the Connecticut. There's large areas in the communities along the Connecticut River that are within the flood hazard area, and you know that the height of the Connecticut is controlled, and so if it floods, it means like basically it's wiped us all out. It's either not going to flood or we're all going to be in the Chesapeake. There's not an in-between option, because that means like more dam broke. It's really odd that you end up, and it has real development implications, just like it does here for you as well, because these properties being in the floodplain doesn't make them necessarily completely undevelopable, but it often effectively does because of the costs associated. You have to build to flood proof, and then there's the insurance requirements, and it's very difficult to get bank financing for land that's in the flood hazard area. So that's a major concern as well. So effectively, these become sort of no-go zones, even though there are ways to build that meets the rules in here. There's a lot of difficulties in doing it. So that actually might be something to get into a little bit more detail in the natural constraints part of the chapter.
It's a very pretty natural area that's created by that dam. And from a kayaker's perspective, which I am, it's absolutely gorgeous out there. And that there's like a little pond there. You can see it sort of in the middle of the screen right there.
Right, yeah. They
It is
call that the
gorgeous.
oxbow.
Yeah. And there's waterfowl and eagles and hawks and geese and ducks and everything that populate that area.
Okay, so I think we've walked through the chapter, and sort of a couple of my major questions and things I wanted you guys to spend some time thinking through. Did anyone have anything that they specifically wanted to bring up from the text? We didn't really spend a lot of time looking at the text.
Copies of what you were showing, the maps.
So you've got, I sent 2 PDFs so far. To do what I just did, the little fly through, you need the fancy mapping software. But I will be making PDFs of the maps as we go along. And once we get some of these down a little bit further, actually the future land use and the current land use ones, I could actually export those in a way that if you use Google Earth, you can open them up in Google Earth and get a little better detail than you can get with the PDFs. But yeah, so you're seeing my mapping software live on the screen there, but you can definitely, we'll be putting maps into the plan that are PDF versions. Okay. So the plan for going forward is that we sort of have now seen a first run through of most of these chapters. There's still obviously a fair amount of work to be done on all of them, but you've now got a first go at it. I know that some of the subcommittees have already been churning on that first draft a little bit. So if you can start to get feedback sent in on those. And we need to get a better sense, I think, Lindsay, as you were saying, what the schedule is in terms of what, and thinking a little bit more about what you want as a product before you're ready to go talk to people and get some more community input. So.
Okay, so I guess the next agenda item is, unless people want to discuss what Brandy had just suggested in terms of what we want to talk about and revisions and that kind of stuff, we could go on to a little discussion about future chapters beyond the original 5, how we address them in, for our own planning purposes, and also how we make reference to them in the document that Brandy is going to be finalizing for us. And I think one of the reasons that we want to make reference to it in some way, shape, or form is because there are important things that are on the immediate horizon, like the facilities, town facilities, that there's the public meeting tonight and Thursday. Meredith Smith is working on creating a historic district. That may not be the right word, over in Enfield Center. And there's just, a bunch of other stuff, energy measures, that kind of thing, that we're going to expand, recreation that we're going to expand upon in future chapters. But I would hate to see people get the impression that we are glossing over or ignoring some of these very important parts of a master plan, which we are not addressing right now. Rob, you had a comment?
I was just, you sort of went right into what I was talking about. The thing that I've had a few people say, like, how does our master plan incorporate in this whole thing about facilities, the town facilities? Obviously, the facilities committee did a lot of work specifically with regard to the library, Whitney Hall, which is the town offices, police, fire, and ambulance. But we have other facilities around town too that we should certainly throw into the mix. And we talked a lot about parks, recreation, arts is one of the ones. Public works. I mean, I work in this facility. It's probably the newest facility that we've got, and it already has its limitations. One of which would be the acoustics in the meeting room with this sound. It was not a big deal until about 2 years ago when we had Zoom meeting startup to have these heating plants right above a drop ceiling and making all this noise. So I definitely think there's facilities might be intertwined or stitched into this a little bit somehow. We've done a lot of work, so we could just incorporate some of that work that we've done. We do have that facilities committee. We have a report from them, which I can share with Brandy so she has a copy of it.
Is that its own chapter?
I want to add to this, Rob.
Yep.
The planning plan, and somebody said today in the forum about, it hasn't really been to the public. They've been working on that. But I do know in the master planning, where that, like the police facility, emergency facility, below that, not far, is ledge. So you're gonna get that, that's a problem up there, to have ledge there. So I would like to plan that, you know, if you're thinking of saying, well, this is where that's gonna go, or this is where that's gonna go. That's what I don't think we should be doing, that kind of planning with a master plan, maybe future
no, I would-
needs.
Not specifics like that.
Well,
Future needs, yeah, I think.
a lot
future
of people
needs.
think yes, you know, so it's the way people are looking at it.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't need something, you know,
Yeah.
it's just where you're gonna put it, where is
Yeah.
it best for the town? And cost, of course.
Yeah, the realities, I mean, I know that our new town manager, when he started at his new job, when he realized the state that Whitney Hall is in, I think he was shocked. It's in a really sad state of repair. It needs to be refurbished. It's got pigeons living inside of the building,
When they're
literally,
alive.
when they're alive, exactly. There's dead things living in the walls. There's leaky roofs. There's snow and ice falling off where the entrance is. That's very dangerous.
I'd like to see that go happen, but again, it's
Yeah.
different plans.
Yeah,
You know, we had a whole plan before, now we got a whole new other plan.
no, I mean,
People are working.
I would say
hard.
this town has been talking about it for a long time, yeah.
What chapter does that go? Is there a facilities chapter? Is there, like, what is that?
I would ask Brandy, what is another town doing? Are they incorporating facilities into their master plan? Is that common?
Yeah, there often is a utilities and facilities type of chapter that would cover municipal and to some extent non-municipally owned utilities. So that sometimes done. Sometimes it's sort of combined together, actually with transportation as well. So you sort of kind of an infrastructure chapter. So there's different ways of organizing it, but yes.
I'm looking at Lebanon's and they have a community facilities and services chapter. So, you know, they have depending on how we decide to do this, you know, just as a neighboring town, you know, they also have a central business district chapter, one that pulls out because they have that central business district. But they have a community facilities and services one. And it, you know, if you pull it up, it starts to outline like what the existing conditions are and the trends, which is a lot of the work that's already been done. I think that answering people's questions, Rob, when they're like, how does this pertain to the master plan? You know, unfortunately, we have multiple projects that are going. And because this master plan is so far out of date, like we shouldn't stop the work the municipal group has done. Eventually we can fold it in as part of the master plan, but like they need to continue with their stuff. And we're catching up. You know, it is what it seems like. We're behind. But as a town, we've let it lapse. And you know, so there's going to be a little bit of like some cart before the horse, some horse before the cart as we all catch up here. And same thing with like incorporating our energy committee and incorporating our recreation committee. We can't wait to do stuff until this is all done, but also, you know, or negate work that other committees have been doing. And that's how we're so behind in everything. It's like, I feel like that we just chase our tails around here.
And perhaps the reason we're chasing our tails is because there's no one central master plan, or hasn't been for a decades, or two decades, 2.5 decades.
And I think that's where this, you know, the discussion we've had about, we have our recommendations, we can have a matrix, and there's a way to kind of hold people accountable / keep track of
Yeah,
progress that, like you said, it's all in one spot. but it also shows people what's happening, or they know there's an easy spot to look. Instead of saying, well, for, MFAC, I have to go see what they were talking about, a master plan, I go over here and see what they're talking, you have that one, these are what the plans are, and the future we would like to see happening in progress, and, what the town has shared with us.
Right,
We're
and
going from there.
the 5-year plan is probably more definite than the 10-year plan, which is more definite than looking 20 years out. So, yeah, I see, the master plan should be a central repository for the work that all these other people have been doing and are doing and will do in the future.
Well, I mean, we should decide on the next few chapters, right? I think to Lindsay's point, facilities and utilities is probably a good chapter to add.
Yeah, I
And-
would
and-
agree.
And then you can bring people in that from the town that are concerned about those particular chapters to this group.
You mean the people who've been on the facility
Yeah,
committees and
yeah.
everything?
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think right now our job is to support the
I
facilities
don't
committee.
know.
I've heard them. I mean, I've heard them.
I think that some of our job right now is because the facilities committee has actually preceded us and has done a lot of work and is out there, that our job is to support them, and versus like,
Yeah.
there could be some narratives that are like, well, it's not in the master plan yet, so we need, like, we support them and say, hey, by our findings right now is that people want to preserve Whitney Hall. We can offer up what information we've gathered that they can use, but then say, in the future, we're going to try to put this into the master plan, and then we go to them and use the work that they've done so that it becomes in a central location, versus saying we usurp them and they can't do anything until we've done it ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we need to be really respectful in that sense and say, for people who are looking like, well, what does the master plan say? And we say, we're going to support the work of this committee, because they did that work, it's predating us. And our findings are showing that people want to preserve the character of this town. They want to be independent. They want to they want to preserve Whitney Hall. Like, so, and then let them continue on their work, and then hopefully bring it in, but not put any kind of brakes on what they're doing, as if we're the authority. Am I coming across clear? What I'm trying to say?
You are, and that sort of embodies the entire process that we've been going through, which is to say, let's get the input from the public and see what the public wants. Let's see if we can reach a consensus, rather than this group or the planning board doing a top-down directive. And the fact that the facilities committee has been working for 2 years or 3 years, whatever it's been, the energy committee has been working for I don't know how many years. Let's pay, I want to say pay homage to, but that's not the right concept. Let's acknowledge their work. That's the idea. Let's acknowledge their work in this first document, and then expand upon it in future.
And, okay, so if we have future chapters, we said recreation, utilities, facilities, what's another one?
I would do energy as its own, maybe, and I would do heritage.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I think we do ones that we actually also have town committees and people that, so there's also the environmental commission, right? Who are the people, the conservation commission? So, which might, so that's like a natural resources one.
Yeah.
But I would start with the things that we are like groups that are already formed and doing stuff. And then yeah, as our next, and then I would love to see later, you know, art kind of, you know, whatever, but maybe just adding art somewhere.
Well, let's take this
But
next,
that's,
let's take this next group of 5 and make that our target for chapter 2 of the master plan. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah.
Bridget,
Let's
Sealy?
say it again,
Okay,
the 5.
but my proposal is to take this group of 5 chapters: facilities, energy, recreation, heritage, and conservation, which already have committees or task forces that have been doing and are producing real good work. And let's group those 5 as the second part of our master plan, which will get done after we finish the first 5 chapters. Does that make sense
Yeah.
to people? Yeah? Brandy, extension of your contract?
Yeah,
Maybe?
yeah, I think that those are all good chapters to think about. The question I guess I would have for you right now is the extent to which you sort of want to lay out the plan with sort of those kind of in reserve. Do you want that noted in the actual document that you're putting together now, that those are coming?
yes,
I think if
Coming
we-
soon to a
Yeah.
plan near you? Okay.
exactly. So people know that like, there is some language that some folks, and I think David and I talked about this, we've been really careful to say like, like this master plan isn't like, it's not just done, like that this has always been phase 1, but there still is a conception like, oh, once it's done, it's done. And we've always had a plan to add on more. So we've tried to use that language. So I think making sure that we have notation in like the next, you know, phase 2, or yeah, the continuation is, and we have placeholder chapters, if you will. So coming to a plan near you in 2024 or 20, you know, something like that would be an appropriate way to do it, I think.
Okay, I'll think about that in terms of the outline.
Yeah, and I feel that there should be just, maybe a paragraph devoted to each of these forthcoming chapters, just so people have an idea of where the town is headed.
Yeah, that layout that I've got going now, sort of in the table of contents, kind of has space for a little summary, a couple of sentences, probably a paragraph, sized area. So then maybe we can experiment with that and see if that works to sort of summarize those pieces that are yet to be developed.
I mean, I think maybe we could reach out to each of these 5 groups and ask them to write a short paragraph on what their goals are for the town. Is that something that people think we should do? We don't have to put it in, but it might be a guide.
Yeah.
I hear a yes from Bridget. Anybody else have a?
I think that makes sense.
I think so, and I think that also that's a good follow-up, because we asked them to come to these meetings and see how it pertained to these chapters, but as a way to say, we're like, you're not, we see you, we hear you, you're part of this, and so yeah.
Okay, good. So that's a goal. That's actually, it's an action item. And Lindsay, maybe you and I can chat about that offline and figure out exactly how we're gonna get that done. Let's see. Phil and Ashley, you guys have been a little quiet. Any thoughts? No? Okay.
I think that sounds good, and that's so nice way to kind of bring it back to where we started with inviting those committees in.
I agree. Good plan, good strategy.
So I think we're done with that section, and we'll go on to returning business. Focus groups, discussion, invitation, and dates. Last meeting, I think we asked every subcommittee to think about and write down the sorts of people that we would want to have on a focus group, their attributes, whether they are for housing, let's say, whether they are renters, landlords, single-family homeowners, whatever. And maybe we can go around the table and see what people came up with. I know, Brad, you guys from transportation came up with a list.
Yep.
So-
And
David?
go ahead, Randy.
I'm sorry, but I actually have another meeting that's starting up and I do need to sign off. I just didn't want to disappear on you guys, but I'll check in with Rob more on the public outreach aspects and sort of where you've landed so we can kind of figure out a timeline so I get a better sense of deadline and what we need to get done by when. Okay?
All right.
Thanks,
for
Brandy.
coming, Brandy.
Thank you guys. Have a good evening.
Bye.
You too.
Okay, so Brad, you wanna?
Yeah, Eric and I talked, we came up with 7 types of users or people that we'd like to see on the transportation and focus group. First one is public transportation users. Second one is cyclists. Third one is elderly residents that walk the town. Fourth one is renters. Fifth one is parents of school-age children. And that could be a couple of different categories, obviously. Sixth one is residents that have long commutes to work. And the last one is a DPW or a public safety person from the town on the committee. Or the focus group.
Okay, you know, that sounds good. Does anybody have anything
Any additions?
that should be added to the types of people we want represented in the transportation focus group? Get their feedback.
Was that Vermont Transit?
Oh, that's the public transportation users.
Oh, okay.
The first one, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, not hearing any. Who wants to do housing?
Sorry, just trying to find my mute button. So we had renters, landlords, single-family residents, developers, seasonal, young families, residents who are interested in and are concerned about aging in place. And I also wondered about, I don't know if this would be a big enough group, but folks who are graduating or have recently graduated from high school and have either left or, I don't know if there's a way to capture that, or are making plans for the future.
Okay, anybody have any additions? Let's see. Anybody from economic development?
Only me.
Only you.
So, to be fair, Maynard and I did not talk about this. So, I mean, thinking about it, obviously we want some of our local business owners. I would even say maybe, would you think EVA for an economic development? Some of the EVA committee members who really that was part of where and what they were working on, and they still kind of discuss it. If we, I don't know if we have any business developers, but I'm sure there are some around that would be interesting to hear to me, future thoughts, but also what would draw them in. You know, are we on the right line of what we're thinking or not? I mean, yeah, and I'd love to say, you know, consumers, but in theory, that could be anybody in town, but I don't know how you'd identify like those who maybe are pretty avid local consumers or shoppers or town, you know.
Is there anything that committee could do that would establish a chamber of commerce?
I don't-
And, for economic development, whether we get somebody that's coming from another town and help that group. They're the ones, you know, they keep the ball rolling in their other towns, you know.
So
It's something we haven't done, but I know that I've talked.
you're
about
talking about creating like an economic development committee or a chamber of commerce or
Talk about
joining?
creating one, maybe bringing somebody in to add to the, your development of your charge there. And that might be another route to throw in, you know, just that's something that could be planned in the master plan. But there's no problem getting somebody from Lebanon, is it? Getting somebody like that.
Shouldn't be.
Did you, Rob,
it
did you
should
do that? Chamber of Commerce?
Well, see, you think I
I
did.
got it here.
I'm just
I have
dipping my toe
connections,
in the
got that
water.
one covered.
Dipping my toe in the water, Brad.
Thank you, Rob, for joining. Excellent.
Let's see, anybody have any other suggestions for economic development? Okay, let's see, we did land use and, we came up with 16 different categories. There's a lot of overlap within and overlap with what some of the other groups come up with, but what we listed are hunter, hiker, non-resident recreator, homeowner, apartment renter, developer, lakefront property owner, business owner, retail in the village, Route 4, or other, and business owner from the 89 area, real estate broker, someone involved in agriculture or logging, owner of a large tract of developable land, contractor, architect or designer, and somebody who would be sort of a cultural advocate.
Yeah, right.
Very, very general list, but that's, you know, those are all people who might have thoughts on land use. Anything else?
I would include somebody from the Energy Committee. Or
Idea?
somebody from the Energy Committee to look for land use for energy production.
Okay. Okay. What did I forget?
Okay, names.
What subcommittee did I forget?
I mean, there's visioning, but it doesn't,
Visioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't,
Work on that.
we don't,
we have our own vision.
exactly, we don't count.
And we've already done our focus group visioning, so that was the,
Okay, so that's kind of what we came up with. If somebody from each of the subcommittees, other than Brad's, would be good enough to write up your list and send it to Rob, then we can distribute it and start to do some thinking about it.
so that's my question is, what's the strategy? And maybe maybe that's what we spend February 14th, our next meeting is really, as Brandy said, what are the next steps? We've got some rough first chapters and really taking some time to dig into like, what do we do now? And maybe that's what we do at the next meeting is like, come up with real, you know, are we gonna personally invite people? Do we want to put it out there as a call for listservs? In order to get people who aren't in the area, we will have to use like Upper Valley listservs, allow people to self-identify, give a time frame. I mean, we need to think of the strategy of how we put these focus groups together. I'd like some group think on that, not just, so how do people feel about that? Or what are some of the next things too, along with this that we need to be doing to get us these 5 chapters moving along with doing focus groups, but also rewriting and that kind of stuff.
Anybody have thoughts to?
And maybe the thought is that that's what we spend the entire next meeting, you know, doing. And, you know, Brandy doesn't have to be as, you know, she can come or not, but we need to strategize again. We've done a lot of work and we need to recognize that first of all, but also how do we now take the work that we've done and start to get this into some finalized forms and reach out to these groups of people that we've identified.
That sounds like a full agenda for our next meeting.
Okay.
Unless anybody wants to modify that or add to it, let's consider that that's what we will be doing on February 14th. I guess we've already identified the next chapters in previous business items. Target dates still up in the air. I don't think we're really ready to.
We should have information on town meeting by then, and then we can also set target dates. So I think if
Yeah.
each subcommittee can continue to think about how would you gather this group of people, we can use multiple strategies. It doesn't have to be the same thing for everybody. So, because some of them do include people that live outside of the town, you know, so Enfield listserv is not just our, it's probably not the only viable option too, so.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when we were doing ours, when Seeley and I were doing ours, we actually came up with a list of possible people who we could invite, rather than trust to a listserv. You can read that for a later discussion. Go from there. Let's see. So we kicked our 2 members of the public out for bad behavior. They had their comment.
What public comments we need?
Which was more than enough for my case. Is there anything else that anybody wants to speak about in the remaining 2 minutes before 8? Somebody make a motion.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made, seconded. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye, thank you.
Live long and prosper.
Phil.